Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube and listening, if you're listening to the podcast, I have another special guest today. He is Mike of Mike's Retro Trading Card. And Mike has been in the hobby for a long time because you owned a shop, correct? Or do you still own it?
Yeah.
Or you used to own it?
No. I closed my shop in late 2004.
Okay. But the past couple of years, Mike has started doing his own YouTube content, a great little panel discussion show. If you haven't watched it, I recommend it. It is a lot of fun. They talk a lot about current hobby topics, of course, and a bunch of other stuff. But I wanted Mike to come on and talk about his history in the hobby. So, Mike, I really appreciate you coming on doing this today.
Thanks for having me. I mean, I got a message from somebody that wanted to interview me, and my first thought was why. so, you know, but I'm happy to be here, and should be a fun conversation.
I like really searching the in depths of YouTube rabbit holes and Instagram places to find collectors and people with voices in the hobby and people who have been doing it for a long time too, especially like you have. So yeah, it was a pleasure, or it's a pleasure for you to come out and do this. And let's go ahead and just start off by talking about how you got started in the hobby. I suppose what was it that you got to start collecting, and what got you wanting to go ahead and open up your own shop when you did?
Well, I was actually okay. I'm gonna really date myself here a little bit, but I was a huge baseball fan in the '70s, early '80s. You know, I was that kid that knew everybody's batting stance. I knew everybody's pitching style, and just obviously out of that, I started buying baseball cards. First set, like I had cards going back to 1974. I don't think they were ones I actually opened. Like the first ones I really remember opening were probably late 70s, 78, 79. But there was a little convenience store that had opened up at the other end of the block where I lived. So, they sold cards. I ended up buying anything and everything. I bought football cards, baseball, even hockey at the time, which is a funny story because I have a Wayne Gretzky rookie card that I just randomly pulled out of a pack when I was a kid that I had no idea who Wayne Gretzky was. I knew nothing about hockey. And it took me, till I was like in high school and I saw a Beckett and I saw a picture of that Wayne Gretzky and I was like, that looks familiar. And I went back through my box of cards from being a kid, and there it was. So, that was mainly my start with it. Then got out of it for a while, and you go through other stuff in your high school years, and wasn't really as interested. And when I probably partway through college, my dad and I started going to a local shop and just collecting together and stuff. And I think it was his idea, going back a ways now, but I think he brought up the idea that, when you graduated from college, we could try opening a card shop if you wanted to. And I was like, oh, so we're going to invest this money and we're going to open a whole bunch of cards and open a shop. I was like, yeah, I'm in. So that was how I got started.
And how long did you own the shop for?
I was there for almost I guess 13 years, a little over 13 years altogether.
And I mean, I suppose part of the idea was coming off of the sort of boom of the card industry of the late '80s. Was that kind of part of the reasoning for it? You think from
Yeah,
your dad, or
I
just
mean, it was a hot period
yeah?
in card collecting. We opened up in the fall of '91, so that was a little bit before Shaq Mania took hold in '92, and it was just like a lot of people are in the hobby now, and there's a lot of money being spent in the hobby, but really, like back then, the number of people, to me, it seemed like that actually collected cards seemed like it was a lot bigger. Like there, and then having the shop, like going to the shop and seeing all the people that were there, and then opening my own shop, and just all kinds of people in day and in afternoons, and just really buying up everything. Like it was a crazy time. It was a really fun time to be part of the hobby. And like I said, the '92 stuff when Shaquille O'Neal came out, like there's been nothing else to me in the hobby like that was like that period of time.
So not even Zion Williamson or Luca or any of
I
that.
mean, I can't really judge so much on that because I really kind of got back into it in late 2020, early 2021. So I can't say I experienced what it was like then. I imagine it's probably similar, but like that Shaq stuff was just, it was just crazy. I know just trying to get boxes of Topps basketball back in the day was next to impossible to do. Like, imagine that now, like not being able to buy Topps because it was just being bought up by everybody. All the candy distributors had people who had ins with them that were buying all that from them. And, we didn't have the internet back then to be able to buy the stuff from. So it was crazy.
And there's one interesting thing that I like to hear about is how was like distribution back in the day handled differently from the way it is now with Panini and Tops.
I didn't start buying direct from anybody till a couple years in. I didn't buy a lot direct. I did buy, I think Playoff Football was the first company that I bought direct from, and then Pinnacle I started buying from because at the time, like Upper Deck was incredibly difficult to get in with. Tops was difficult to get in with. You had to buy a certain amount of product and you had to buy everything that came out. And like, I was a little card shop in a little town, like a town of like 5,000 people or so. And we actually had two card shops, mine and one right across the street, which,
Oh, really?
so yeah, that was quite interesting. So, although I did buy them out a number of years later, so I feel like I kind of won the first, card war back then. But yeah, Pinnacle was one of the first ones that I remember getting in touch with that you didn't have to buy everything, which that was really big because, I was into hockey and I had hockey customers, but I couldn't really use a case of every hockey product that they put out. So, over time, I was able to buy direct from Upper Deck. Then they lightened up what you needed to do to buy from them, and you could just pick and choose what you wanted. But it was difficult back then to get in, especially with Tops.
Mm. Well, I wonder how difficult it's going to be going forward with Fanatics. That's a big
Yeah,
question in hockey right
sounds like it might be a little difficult for shops. Like I see some of those rules and stuff, and I'm like, wow, I'm kind of happy I don't have a store anymore because
now. Yeah, do you think you could change your store to look like what Fanatics wants people's shops to look like nowadays? Like, how hard would that be for you?
it knowing how my shop was, it would have been very difficult because I mean, I was in a small town, so like cards weren't the only thing I sold. I ended up getting into, video games and selling like CDs and DVDs and stuff too because, you know, when the card market dipped, you had to do something to stay open. So I kind of became, the card shop that also bought and sold other stuff. So yeah, it would have been really difficult for me.
And for those who don't know what we're talking about, I believe there's something that they put out that said that they will have on-site inspectors of these actual
Yeah,
card shops in order for them to agree to do business with you. Is that what? Isn't that correct?
that's
Essentially,
what it sounds like. Yeah, that you're gonna have to have basically your FYE kind of store, like with everything in its place, and you have to have your own spot for top stuff. I think you have to have a point of sale system now, and
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of shops out there that it won't be a problem for, but like. One of the shops I go to around here is in a small town. The guy's in his 70s. He's been doing it for a long time. That's what I like about it. It kind of reminds me of what those 90s card shops looked like.
Yeah.
But like it would be next to impossible for a guy like him to be able to do all that. So I mean, I understand why they want to do it and they want to project an image with their dealers, but at the same time, it's probably gonna, get rid of some of the older dealers that can't really do what they need them to do.
Yeah. Okay, so you closed up shop in the early 2000s. You say you got back into the hobby around 2020, kind of like a lot of people did. It sounds like.
Yeah.
And what made you get back into it? What made you want to start doing the YouTube content and podcasts?
Boy, well, the three of us that do the podcast, I mean, we've been friends. They were former customers of mine from my shop. So I've known Joe and Eric both since they were, kids, like teenagers. And, I was quite a bit younger at the time too. So, we just developed a very strong friendship over the years. Even after the shop like closed up, we still play fantasy football. And, we've had a group text thread forever, three of us. And, you know, Eric kept saying that, boy, cards are getting hot again. Cards are getting hot again. And I still had a huge amount of leftover inventory from when I closed my shop. When I closed my shop, I sold off some of the stuff at the time, but it was in storage and I pretty much walked away from it. So, since the card market was getting hot, I had all these cards. I figured, oh, well, this is my opportunity to get in and just sell these. I don't care about cards anymore. So I'll sell my cards. I'll get out of it and I'll get all this money for what I had left. Well, here we are. 3 years later, and I have a YouTube channel, and I'm still into cards. I'm enjoying them as much as I ever have. So it, kind of weird the paths that life takes you on, but here we are. Yeah, and the YouTube channel just came out of the three of us talking. Well, we should do this. I watched content, so like we really like PSA reveals and stuff. And because I had gone through my cards, I had a big PSA order that with a lot of great cards in it. So we were like, oh, well, we'll have to record that. So one thing just kind of led to another, and here we are.
Still doing it. And
Yeah.
it was just something that became fun for you because you're not just doing it. You're like the guy who's actually editing this, and you're kind of taking the lead on making sure these things get turned out on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, I do all the editing, and I host the podcast. I mean, we text through the week and we come up with our ideas and we all throw those out there. So it's not like it's my podcast. We're all partners in this. And I mean, honestly, like we enjoy the fact that we're three longtime friends, and now every week we just get together to talk. And it usually takes us a half hour or more before we even start recording because we're just talking, and after we're done we're still talking. So whether or not people were watching us, we enjoy the opportunity to get together once a week on a schedule and record our content and just kind of virtually hang out with each other.
That's pretty cool. And and now you've had other content people come on recently. I've noticed you've had Dustin, Sports Card Dad, and Ziggy No, and some other people. And so you've sort of started doing that as well, bringing other people on to get their opinions on things happening in the hobby. And of course, now is a better time than ever, possibly, at least it feels like it, to do any type of content on the hobby, because it feels like there's something to talk about on a pretty regular basis. I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, off the top of my head that I can think of, I mean, we've had Panini versus Fanatics, and then Fanatics versus Panini, back and forth, and lawsuits back and forth on each other. We had Blake's Breaks, the Blake Martinez getting kicked off Whatnot scandal.
And the collecting cardboard situation with the Rock autograph.
Yeah, collecting cardboard versus Sports Card Radio. Somebody else, Sports Card Radio, ticked off in the hobby. And then just the other day, I was going through my Twitter feed, or X, or whatever the crap it's called now, and there's all this stuff about Wander Franco popping up, and everyone freaking about their Wander Franco cards. So just within the last couple of weeks, that's a lot to talk about. And it feels like it's been that way for quite a long time. I mean, do you remember hobby? I mean, obviously we didn't have hobby content like this back in the 90s and early 2000s because we just didn't have these capabilities with online and streaming services and things like StreamYard and Instagram Live and all these things that anyone can hop on and make content with. But still, I mean, just the stuff that's out there in the hobby news, it feels like it's such an abundance comparison to what it used to be. Or am I remembering that?
I don't remember any craziness like this back when I had my shop. I mean, I'm sure there was more of it out there than we knew about at the time, but we didn't have social media, so we didn't have people, catching any little thing that was happening. I mean, there's always been scammers in this hobby. It's just now they're getting caught more often because people are a little more wise to it, and they're, our voices, like sports card radio, whether you like them or hate them, they do bring a lot of this, to the forefront of the hobby. And like, we've talked about them quite a bit on our channel. Like, I know that the way they do things might not always be the way I would do them, but I do think the message that they have and the part that they're playing right now is kind of important, because like I said, people have always scammed people and they've always gotten away with it. Like, and at point, the weird thing about this hobby are people kind of start to turn into the, oh, well, like everybody does it thing. And it's like with the trimming cards thing with Evan Mathis, it's like, well, a lot of people are doing it, but then I saw people that were like, yeah, well, what are you going to do? That's how it is. It's like, but you should be upset about it. Like, we shouldn't have to worry about it, but we do. And because this hobby has kind of been its own little world for so long, that people just kind of are okay with behavior that they wouldn't be okay with, like, in any other aspect of their life.
Yeah, it's almost become normalized.
Yeah,
Card trimming is important because it's been in the hobby for forever, or at least since card grading was a big thing, and card grading gave you extra value on your cards. People have been trimming cards and trying to get away with. I mean, obviously, the very first card, Onus Wagner, the Onus Wagner that was graded by PSA, the first one ever. I mean, that's how far back, literally, that history has gone. And so it's important to know about that history. So I think it's an important topic to bring up quite often. But at the same time, yeah, it's almost like become a very normalized thing now, where people just don't think it's even that big of a deal, and people are comparing it to just like, oh, they do the same thing when they clean coins and press comic books and things like that. It's like, I don't think it's the same. I still don't.
Yeah. Pressing a comic book is a different thing than trimming a card. Like, if you trim a comic, then the comic won't be authentic. Like, that's where people are making a mischaracterization of what happens in comics, because there are things that are acceptable, but like altering the actual book, like adding something to it or taking something, like, you can't trim a page on a comic book and it's okay. So, use the right, at least use the right, comparison to a comic book if you're going to try to say that it's okay.
Yeah. But yeah, you mentioned the Evan Mathis scandal, and that actually wasn't too long ago. That was like a couple months ago, but it feels like forever ago, because
it does.
It already feels like kind of a forgotten thing to a lot of people. Because just stuff pops up like literally on a weekly basis, and has gotten really crazy with hobby news over these past few years, which I guess is a good thing because it shows the interest, the overall interest in the hobby. But man, it's like, what are you supposed to do as a collector now? Like, can you trust any platform right now? I mean, I certainly wouldn't trust Whatnot. I know that.
Me either.
Yeah, but what platforms can you truly trust? Can you trust PWCC? I don't know about that with their shady past. Can you trust even eBay? Can you trust any of these platforms? Can you trust any breaker? Knowing about all the shadiness that goes on, and the Blake's Breaks thing with Blake Martinez made like national headlines basically recently with their shadiness. I mean, what are your thoughts when you see all this stuff happening, and if you still owned your shop, for instance, and you had people come in and be like, I love collecting, I want to start collecting, where do you point them to other than just saying, you can trust me, but I don't know, well, like, who else
I don't have everything.
Exactly.
I still like eBay a lot. I've been using eBay since 1997. Like, that's how old I am. Back when people used to send a check in the mail for the item that they won. But, I do think eBay tries to do right. I mean, the end of the day, they're a big company. They're trying to make money for themselves. But I think it is a little safer to buy on there. You're not safe anywhere, like completely safe. So like if you just kind of understand that you need to maybe be a little smarter when you're looking at something. If a deal might be too good to be true, you need to say why instead of just jumping on it and going, oh, I got to get that. So, but I do think eBay is a fairly safe platform. I think Golden's platform, now that they're owned by Collectors Universe, is probably pretty good too. Let's hope that Fanatics will take PWCC, and I would assume they'll turn it. It's going to be better than what it was. So I would think that will end up being a pretty big marketplace too.
That's another thing that's already almost out of my mind right now, is that news that they took over PWCC and ousted the former CEO.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Brent Higgins, I think.
Yeah, he's also been a person that's been long in the hobby news in terms of potential shadiness.
Yeah,
that wasn't that long ago, and it's already kind of in the back of my mind. So that's another crazy thing that's happened recently.
Yeah, doing the podcast in the style that we do, like all this stuff happening is good for us because it gives us something to talk about. But like it is kind of crazy. We will talk to each other and we'll be texting and we'll talk about something. We'll be like, that was only 2 months ago. Like, doesn't that feel like it was last year? And, collectively we're all like, yeah, but it is crazy, like how much happens and how quickly it happens. And, in the Blake Martinez stuff, the video, Rattle Pokemon, I believe, is the guy on YouTube who was doing a bunch of videos, and like seeing, like, they weren't even good at the scamming that they were doing. It was so blatantly obvious there, but like they had what was supposedly a message that he had sent out to his staff, and basically just telling them, don't talk about it. If somebody calls you out on it, just say you don't know anything about it and it'll blow over. And sadly, that's probably true. If he wouldn't have been kicked off Whatnot, like, and they wouldn't have made it into that, it would have blown over and people would have forgotten about it. And that's, kind of the downside of this hobby. But, there's going to be something happen in a week or two that's going to make everybody forget what he did this week.
I can't remember who it was on your podcast, though, that I thought made a good point about how Whatnot probably had to do that if they didn't want regulation coming down on them. Because to me, like, that wasn't just like people in a break even. They were like running games of chance, from what I understand, with what they were doing and drawing energy cards from the packs of Pokemon boosters that they were opening. I still don't quite understand it myself personally. I'm not a Pokemon collector, but from my understanding is, they were adding a little bit of like people wanting people to put down a little bit more money by adding these games of chance with every single packs that they're opening, and depending on the energy card they draw, you could have potentially won a bounty, blah blah blah. And they were rigging that so that, because they knew which packs had certain energy cards, so they knew they weren't giving out a bunch of bounties during their cycles of live feeds, whatnot. So how can Whatnot allow something like that to even happen in the first place? Because literally that feels like you're just going to a casino and putting money down on a craps table. So I can imagine all kinds of stuff coming down on Whatnots for just even allowing games like that happening on their platform.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot too. Like, I feel like if these bigger companies don't do something, it is going to happen. Like we played fantasy football since 1996. I started a league at my shop when it was open. And, back then I would have never guessed that the states would consider that gambling. And now it's regulated. It falls under that. For a while, it wasn't even, I live in Pennsylvania. It wasn't even legal to play on some of the fantasy football sites that I had played on before. So, people can't think that, it won't happen to sports cards, because it will if they don't get it under control. Because, there are too many people being ripped off by doing this stuff that eventually you're going to get noticed. And especially when you're a big name company like Whatnot and you have a big name former NFL football player that was doing this stuff, which I don't understand. You're doing so much business on there anyway, but you still need to try to rip people off and take a little bit more. Like, he could have run a perfectly legitimate business there, made a lot of money, and not had any troubles. But there's something about this hobby that some people, it's just not enough, and I don't understand it. Like, you're ruined a big business, a great business that you had by, like, swapping out packs. Like, why? In the big picture, how much more is that really making you over just running your business? You can make enough money breaking, and especially if you're the top breaker on a platform. It blows my mind that you would risk that to
Especially,
make a little more.
yeah, and you're a former pro athlete, so you've already made
Yeah,
a lot of
he
money.
made a lot of money when he played football.
And that's another funny thing too. Is like, why does this keep happening with pro athletes that try and dabble into this hobby? Like, why do Blake Martinez and Evan Mathis and
Hmm.
possibly Dimitri Young? I don't know for sure still, but like those are some names of like, so like it was a big deal when those former athletes got into like the hobby business and were, like people, like made a big deal about it. But it's like, why do they all wind up doing something shady in the end? Why do they feel like
Yeah,
they need to? I don't know. It's kind of bizarre. Yeah. And once again, it's like, didn't you make enough money as a pro athlete? Do you really like?
yeah. You need to, rip off, some regular guy that's just trying to get a card of a player that he likes, or, a Pokemon character that he collects. It's like, I don't know.
Man, yeah, it's crazy. Um, so the most important news that's happened probably in these past few weeks has been Panini versus Fanatics lawsuit. We haven't really talked about that; just kind of glossed over it. I want to get you overall thoughts because this does potentially have repercussions for the hobby for like the next 10 to 20 years. And this is like, we saw a big change in the hobby back when Panini took over things from the companies like Upper Deck and Tops. And Upper Deck had already bought out Fleers. So they basically monopolized the hobby themselves, especially when it came to basketball and eventually football. Now Fanatics is basically kind of doing the same thing on their end that Panini did, but Panini is fighting it tooth and nail to the very end, of course, and claiming Fanatics is doing things that Panini kind of did themselves for quite a few years. But we can go back and forth on that. But essentially, we're coming to a point, it feels like, of a really major change that's really important to note and to try and remember all these things that happened down the road. Because, like I said, I feel like we're at a pretty important point, like we were back in like 2009, 2010, when we saw this other major change happen during that time period as well.
Yeah, I mean, I am not a fan of Panini. If you listen to the podcast, you'll hear me talk about it, but I'm not. And like, looked over Paul Lesko's, synopsis of the lawsuit and everything, and like, just every point was like, yeah, but you've been doing this. Like, they just come off as very hypocritical in the whole situation. And I feel like Panini is complacent. They were more than happy to just print cards, make all the money. They had exclusive licenses. Nobody was going to take that from them for quite a while. So they could print money. They don't care. Like, this company is actively fighting in a court of law to make redemptions not necessary to fill. They're fighting that they're not contracts, that they don't have to fill a redemption if they put it in your product. Like, what kind of a company is that? Like, they are, and nobody talks about it anymore. Like, they want a court to legally determine that if you pull a redemption card, if they can't fill it, oh well, it's a big deal. They can decide what is a fair value to replace it with. Like, I feel like their hubris in this hobby has grown to the point that I don't know if Fanatics is going to end up being good, bad, or indifferent for the hobby, but I'm ready to see a change, because I think Panini has just been more than happy to do nothing but make money. Like, the prices of boxes right now, they don't have to charge what they charge. And I've always thought it was a little weird that their distributors would come out marking it up like 5 times what it's supposed to sell for. And then all of a sudden, Panini would also then release it live on their website, like through the app, for the same price that the distributors are selling it for. Like that never sat well with me. Like the market wasn't creating the price on the cards, they were creating the market for it. And I don't know if it's price fixing, people don't want to say that, but it is a little odd that, continually stuff sells for so much more than what the retail is supposed to be on it. Even like a product like Score Football, nobody is really interested in that yet. It's selling for what, $300 a box still.
Yeah, well, yeah, you've had a lot of opinions, and you haven't even really necessarily have to deal with Panini. Like you like you,
Only as a collector. So
yeah.
yeah.
Imagine what the shop owners now are dealing with, and then I wonder what they're going to be dealing with. Obviously, when they change the Fanatics essentially for everything, but yeah, the distribution model, especially with these boxes and the markups and prices over the years, I'm amazed it's been as sustainable as it has been. But obviously, it's been sustainable because you have so many things feeding into it, like big breaking companies
Hmm.
that can buy up that much inventory, and just I don't know, just uh, retail companies that will re up on their contracts because these things are still flying off the shelves, especially from 2020 2021 during that time period in particular. So Panini gets away with it because the market's still there, I guess. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, it feels like they could have made decisions to bring prices down. They could have made decisions to start actually putting game worn jerseys back into the product. Like, I don't understand the reason why they still don't do that. Like, they could have said during the pandemic, fine, we don't have the materials because it's the pandemic, no one's playing games. I get that. We're like 2 years past the pandemic now. We're still getting napkins off of Dick's Sporting Goods racks
Yep.
in like $2,000 boxes. It's pretty insane when you think about it. And I think if you take that product model and you take it into sort of other categories and there were other places of retail, people would probably laugh at that and be like, "That just sounds ridiculous. Why would I spend $2,000 on that?" So yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
And like, again, that's our little bubble that we're in here is just so unlike anything else in the business world, like the retail world, that I don't know why. But again, like you say, why is it that they do that? And we talk about this on the podcast all the time too. A running theme is because collectors just put up with it. And it's crazy how many people have decided, well, it's just I'd rather have a cool looking patch than have it actually be game worn or something. And it's like, as long as people don't care and they don't stop buying a product, it's kind of like they have these people addicted though. So like they might not like what they do, but they're still going to buy the product because that's what they do. And if they don't do it, what are they going to do? So it's just people put up with it so they can do whatever they want to do, sadly.
It's like I still got to get my Prism fix every year. I still got to get my
Yeah.
National Treasures fix every year, no matter what. But
Yeah,
I
I'll
don't.
spend $1,100 or $1,200 a box on Prism for what, 12 packs. So yeah, it's
So,
crazy.
so I can pull. Um, I can pull that Trevor Lawrence because he's gonna be the next big star.
You'd be lucky to pull Trevor Lawrence.
I
So
know it's insane to me. I've gone I know a lot of collectors that are out there that I've talked to over the years. They're like, just I don't even care. I don't care what happens because whatever Fanatics does with the cards nowadays means no bearing to me whatsoever because I'm only going to collect things from like prior to 1970 or whatever, and that's great. I think that's another reason why there's so much interest in the hobbies because you have so many different types of things that you could be interested in collecting.
mhm.
Whether you want to just collect vintage and old school stuff, or you want to be a box breaker, or just a singles buyer, or a set collector. All these different things you can get into. So that's great. But going back to Fanatics versus Panini. So what do you kind of see happening going forward, and what? I mean, based off of what we've seen so far from the two sides going back and forth with these initial lawsuits. I mean, what do you think is going to be going on down the road from here on out?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I just like to play one on my podcast. And, we make it perfectly clear we don't know what we're talking about, but we're going to give our opinion about it anyway. I mean, I don't think anything comes out of either of the lawsuits. Like, clearly, Fanatics was just doing the countersuit to get their side of the story out there. They were, they wanted to say, although I was interested in the fact that they were trying to get, negotiate with Panini for them to let go of the licenses. Like, everybody thought that they were trying to buy Panini. So I found it interesting that they didn't seem to care about the IPs and stuff that Panini has. And they just want them to go away, and they were willing to pay them to do that. So I don't think that really gets talked about enough, but I thought that was really big. So, like, I feel like they just want to do their thing, Fanatics does, and they just want Panini out of the way. And Panini's like, well, we're making too much money. So they're gonna probably throw barbs at each other this whole time, and probably nothing really will come out of it until the day that the licenses switch, and then Fanatics will finally get to take over.
That's pretty interesting how Fanatics sent their document out almost to make sure they got out to the public things that annoy them about dealing with Panini.
It sounded like a collector just airing their grievances about
just to get their jabs at
yeah.
Panini. Like, I think they even mention how Panini calls their memorabilia products just like what was the term they used? Pajamas or something?
Something like that, yeah.
Just to kind of show that Panini truly doesn't care,
Yeah.
and just to keep showing that Panini truly does not care about the consumer or the collector or whatever. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting to read both documents if you have time to read both of them. The Fanatics one is especially really interesting to read because, like you said, it
It's
almost has a
entertaining.
list of grievances that
Yeah.
we've all had over the years about redemptions and memorabilia and sticker autos, and pretty much everything that we've all complained about is in this one document. So does that mean that Fanatics is going to do away with all those things? I mean, I certainly hope so. I really don't want to see pajama relics and seriously, Christmas sweater
Yeah.
relics. I do not want to see Christmas sweater relics in product anymore, and I don't want to see sticker autos in product anymore. But I know that's probably something that's never going to completely go away, and I understand the reasons for it. But I don't know. What do we think Fanatics is actually going to be able to do with products going forward?
Well, I mean, by doing the countersuit, though, I feel like they are setting a bar at a certain level that collectors are now going to have an expectation. The very first podcast we did a review of interview that Michael Rubin did with Bill Simmons on his podcast. And, it's like even back then, that was early 2021, I think, or early 2022, early 2022. But he had a plan of what they wanted. And the companies they bought since then, like, have all fallen into what he even said back then. So one of the things I know he mentioned in there were about how collectors hate having redemption cards and stuff. So they're probably never going to be able to completely get rid of redemption cards, but I think collectors will be happy if there are very few of them. And I do expect that should be one area where they really do work to make sure they fulfill that promise, because knowing that even way back then, before they even owned Tops, before they even started doing anything really, he knew it was an issue. And I don't think he was a big collector, so he's getting that information from people. So he hopefully has people around him that know what people are complaining about and what they need to do to fix it. So I'll give them the opportunity to do that before I, just say, well, they're not going to do it. Like, let's give them an opportunity. They're that new kid on the block. I feel like, they're very successful. Like, he's a very successful guy. Like, I might as well let him fail before I criticize him for failing. So,
well, like you said, they're talking up a big game. They are saying all the right things. they certainly seem to have the means to make a lot of these things happen, especially when it comes to like their distribution model, and how I do hope that that will be a big help lower some of these prices on these boxes, and the means to actually do, yeah, like more significant memorabilia stuff, and like being able to know exactly where your memorabilia pieces come from
Mhm.
and things of
Yeah.
that nature. They certainly have the means to do that, so there's a lot of expectation that things will definitely be getting better soon. So going forward with you, what are you going to be interested in collecting going forward? You said you still kind of have an interest of picking up things here and there. What are some of the things you're looking at from here on out as a collector?
Well, I actually collect a wrestling manager, Paul Heyman from WWE. So he's my main PC. I I find it's a little. I'm in a weird spot at this point in my life because like I was always a dealer,
Hmm.
so I was never able when I had my shop to just keep the cool stuff that came in. I appreciate all this different really cool looking stuff, but because I could never keep it before, I don't really have that like desire in me that oh I have to keep that. So it's I don't know how to explain it. I consider myself a collector because I love the cards and I love to have them, but then I also love trying to buy cards that I can get to other people. Like I spent a lot of time at the local card shop just digging through boxes and finding dollar and $2 cards that people like to buy and selling them that way. So that part of me has come back, the old dealer side of it. I do have a collection of cards over my shoulder there, so but they're mostly wrestling cards. I have some of my older cards in there, but like I'm into stuff like the 90s stuff, the Barry Sanders cards and Ken Griffey Jr. cards and refractors and the cool inserts that came out then, the die cut stuff and like the Pacific prisms and stuff like that. So, like, going forward, I don't think there's going to be anything new that makes me like that stuff less. Like,
Yeah,
that's my nostalgia. That's when I had my shop. And, the way that things innovated during the 90s, like, I remember these new products coming out, and I remember collectors either liking it or hating it. And, you know, that makes it fun for me to have that stuff now because it brings me back to those simple days where I had my shop and all this stuff was brand new to everybody.
very cool. So, do you have any rock autographs in your collection?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't have any. Maybe I can call collecting cardboard. They might be able to hook me up.
Silly, none that have been authenticated by
By
someone's
Rick.
by Rick. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we joke about it, but
I do too. Yeah, I had to make fun of it a little bit. I mean, seriously though, what would you have done if, once again, like if you were still a shop owner and somebody comes into your shop with like the story of like Rick, my buddy Rick tells me these rock autographs are legit. What do you do with inventory like that as a shop owner?
my problem with their whole side of the story, and I'm not here to rip on collecting cardboard, but as somebody who was a dealer,
Mhm.
I don't believe for a second that you would be selling something like the Rock's autograph because like he doesn't sign a lot. So if it's authentic, it's worth a lot of money. So you're not going to just sell that like unauthenticated. I don't, they might not like BGS. Maybe they don't like PSA. Maybe they felt that Rick, but like you need to know if you're going to sell that to somebody. I don't understand any world where somebody who's selling cards for a living and making money doing so wouldn't say, well, I'm going to send this in to BGS or PSA because if it's real, it's going to be worth $1,000 instead of me selling it for $50 on eBay. Like, I don't believe for a second that they thought 100% that it was real. Maybe they didn't know it wasn't real, but I'm certain that they weren't completely positive that it was real. And like you send it away, whether it comes back authentic or not. then you're not putting a fake autograph into somebody's hands. And I don't know. I understand that their side is, well, we would refund people if the autographs aren't real. But I think you have a little bit of a responsibility as a seller to not just be randomly throwing autographs that you don't know are real out into the hobby. Like there might be somebody on the other end of eBay there buying that card that will cherish it for 20 years thinking it's real, and then one day go to authenticate it and find out it isn't. And then like they're crushed. Like I just, that would bother me. So I feel like you do have a responsibility if you're somebody that goes out and buys collections to get at least certain levels of an autograph authenticated before you sell them.
Yeah, I think you said it really well with saying it's really a responsibility as a legit seller to go ahead and authenticate that, because and it honestly doesn't cost that much money and take that much effort. I mean, it even just to send it to JSA even or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just send it to some reputable authenticator. Especially when you're dealing with, like you said, a guy like The Rock. The one that surprised me the most was the fact that they just had that random piece of paper signed by Ty Cobb. And they were acting like, well, we weren't going to authenticate this, but now we will, and we'll give this away as that giveaway video that they've since deleted because everyone made fun of it and hated it. So it's like, wait a minute, you have a Ty Cobb auto that you weren't going to potentially authenticate? That's
it doesn't make any sense.
I don't know any dealer since I've ever been collecting in the 90s that would approach any Ty Cobb autograph in that sort of way. Because that's like the trifecta of old school baseball autographs of Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Lou Gehrig. You always authenticate those. You never leave those just a chance. You never just sell them as is. I mean, I don't think anyone does that in this industry, period. So that was very shocking to me.
Yeah,
more shocking than The Rock.
And then you wonder why. Well, why is it? Then my brain always goes to, why aren't you going to do that? And the only answer I can come up with is because you don't really think it's real, but you don't want to know it's not real. And I just have a problem with that. And if grading wasn't really as big of a thing back when I had my shop, but if I had a shop now and I had somebody who I bought a collection of, let's just say, Mickey Mantle cards or something from, if it was somebody that I felt like this was a legitimate thing, I would still send them in to a grading company just to know they're authentic before I would sell them. I would never just send them out into the hobby. Well, I think I can trust this guy. So I would rather know than think I could trust somebody.
Yeah. You certainly wouldn't get a 52 Topps Mantle from somebody and just be like, and I'm pretty sure this is legit. So exactly. I'll just go ahead and resell it. I'll sell it for $1,000, and or whatever. It's like, no, I don't think anyone would do that.
And you don't want to give up that potential profit that you could make by it being real too. That's the key part in all of this that really doesn't make any sense. You're missing out on profit, and that's the whole reason you're doing what you're doing. And those two things don't really match up.
Yeah. So I know you've had a lot of fun with that recently, and you guys had a lot of fun with all these other things popping up recently. It's been, like I said, a really interesting time in the hobby lately. Great for doing content.
Helps a lot.
But also great for general interest in the hobby too. I mean, is there any comparison that you can think of during your entire time in the hobby in terms of the amount of interest? I mean, probably during that time period of the late 80s, early 90s might be the closest thing, and you can probably compare the two in terms of which probably peaked at the highest in comparison. But I can't think of any other time really when it comes to the overall interest in this hobby from all kinds of people. Yeah.
Well, that's what's similar now to the early 90s, because you do see mainstream media coverage about stuff. And, LeBron James coming into the league was a big deal for basketball cards, and Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire hitting home runs were a big thing for baseball. But really that early 90s, everybody seemed to know about collecting cards or knew somebody who collected cards. And I kind of feel like it's that way again. And I enjoy the fact that, a lot of the people that were kids that were coming into my shop that got out of it have gotten back into it now too, and they're sharing the hobby with their kids, which, some of these kids, it's crazy when you go to like the big card shows with their Pelican cases full of like $1,000 plus cards, and they know all their comps. It's like I feel like we're building a great generation of business people for the future, because some of these kids are just like amazing listening to them negotiate with a
Yeah,
dealer at a table. But
talking about ROI and things like
yeah,
that at an early age.
it's
Yeah,
crazy. But yeah, that early 90s time, I mean, I wax poetic about it, but like that was a big time for me. That's when I first started. And, I used to have to run to a card show a couple hours away on a Thursday night in a hotel room, like to not hotel room, a hotel lobby, and like pick up like product to sell at my store because it was so hot at the time. Like I remember selling, I think there were Fleer jumbo packs for like $5 a pack for 1992 Fleer baseball. Like imagine that now. But like it was crazy. Stadium Club basketball when Shaq was a rookie, like you couldn't touch that for under like $250 a box at the time, which it was supposed to be a product that sold for like $50 a box. So, it was 5x. It was just kind of crazy. But yeah, it is similar now to that.
yeah. And also similar to where I feel like a lot of people are interested in it that aren't necessarily sports fans, but
Mm-hmm.
just people looking for other things to potentially invest in, or just they see other people on YouTube and other social media outlets that are like, making money, or having great times at these shows and making big trades and big transactions. And it's gotten a lot of interest from a lot of different people, and that's been both a good thing and a bad thing, probably depending on who you ask. But just overall, just looking at what's occurred like at the National this year, where the market value on a lot of these cards have definitely been going down, as a lot of people have been noting over the past like 6 to 12 months. But thousands of people, tens of thousands of people are still showing up at the National and still doing a bunch of deals there. And it's just crazy. It's just a crazy time right now. And it'd be interesting to see how long this sort of peak of interest lasts. And we don't have to talk about peak of markets because we've already kind of seen that. But I think we're still in the peak of the interest overall in
Yeah,
the hobby.
definitely. I agree with that. They're just, like somebody like me. I'm a perfect example. I was perfectly fine walking away when I closed my shop. And I did, I was lucky enough to be able to close my shop on for my own reasons. Like I didn't have to, I didn't go out of business. I just decided that point in my life I was done and completely walked away. And like I said, I was going to sell off my inventory and take my money and run. And then here I am because I enjoy this and I remembered I enjoy this. And I feel like there are a lot of people like me, the ones that were buying Pokemon cards in the 90s or buying the Ken Griffey Juniors back then. They realized how much they actually enjoyed that, and they can still enjoy that part of it. You don't have to spend $1 million on a card. You don't have to, have your $10,000 pictures on Twitter all the time. You can we have a little saying on our podcast: if you're happy with a $2 card, then we're the people you should be watching, because we honestly feel that way. Like EP is just has stuff all over his apartment. You can see it in the background of his screen every episode. But we like that stuff, and there's just I feel like a lot of those people are in it and enjoying it now. And it doesn't really matter what the market cap is anymore, because we can still have fun enjoying this hobby for why we enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a real good place to kind of wrap things up. Was there anything else you want to make sure to mention? I mean, anything else that you guys do outside of your YouTube channel and podcast channel? I mean, you're also on Instagram now, of course. But yeah, anything else you want to make sure to plug or mention, or any
Not a
big?
whole lot. We're doing We're doing a live stream on our YouTube channel on the 19th, Saturday night. So we have a lot of fun with that. We actually, this whole YouTube thing still blows my mind that we have any subscribers or any watchers. I don't know why people do it, but we appreciate it. And we've had slow organic growth, and we even have people turn up for our live streams. It was a good time. They ask us questions, and we can be a little more, off the cuff and a little less edited than we are on the podcast. So it's usually a good time. So if people want to check us out, check that out.
Absolutely, yeah. So there you go. Saturday night, check them out. Once again, Mike's retro trading card. If you haven't checked out the channel, yeah, I highly recommend you do. It's a lot of fun. Mike, thank you so much once again for joining me in this conversation. It's been a lot of fun talking to you.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.